Our next author is Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville would probably be more the French pronunciation. He's one of our earlier writers. He comes after the other early moderns. He was much influenced by Rousseau and took some of his ideas and developed them. That he wrote a book that he called Democracy in America, which was a meditation on the coming future of democracy. That he was not an enemy of democracy, not a doubter so much as a complex thinker, somebody who had a subtle and thoughtful understanding of democracy. So he gives a kind of punctuation to our political readings, which have been pointed toward democracy in the modern way, liberalism, democracy that's not simply the rule of the people, but also freedom for individuals. And he, as you can see from the reading, leads us through a meditation on the promises, warns us where we might be disappointed of democracy. So, he was born into a French noble family. There was a Duke of Tocqueville, but he was born after the French Revolution, which of course makes all the difference. He came from an important family of history, but they had lost their standing. They were just citizens by the time that Tocqueville was born. And so he owed an advanced position, an elevated position to history, but not to present realities. And this was a large part of his thinking, that he was someone who spoke to the newly dispossessed upper class, the upper class which had been very important in France, that it had all the power, had lost it, and they still retained some historical influence, at least those that were lucky enough not to get their heads chopped off in the revolution, had still some habits of deference from the public, and by habit they were still important socially. But that was not according to the new rules, which were extremely democratic. Although that changed, and there were many upheavals over the course of French history after the Revolution and through Tocqueville's life. I think you probably remember some of those from Civ 102. The French could not quite get themselves adjusted to democracy and having their habits and their history in the old world, and having made bold experiments into the new. And so Tocqueville was someone who knew intimately the upper class in France because they were his friends and relations. But he was, as a young man, very excited by the prospect of democracy and very, very eager to witness what history was bringing. And he set himself up as someone who could explain the virtues of democracy to the old aristocratic upper class. So that's essentially a different perspective than someone who would be of the people, someone from a common family who had a working experience, or someone of the upper class who just dreaded and despised the new powers that had destroyed their old way of life. He set himself up as a kind of ambassador to explain the virtues of democracy to people with old sensibilities. That's part of the interest for us. It's always the interest in old books that they don't have our assumptions, so they make stronger arguments in a way. They see things about what was lost due to progress that we have a hard time seeing because it isn't so much progress for us. We've always had it. We've always lived among people who agreed that it was the best way. But Tocqueville had a different perspective, and that was how he pitches things. And so he tends to see, and there's a good example in the reading for today, he tends to see the strengths of democracy, but also how they've changed from the old world. He tends to notice the virtues of the old world that have been lost, and is especially alert as to what new good thing will come in, what will compensate us or pay us back for the things that are lost. And we just get a little taste by reading a small amount of his book. I borrowed from Wikipedia a picture they have of a page of the manuscript of his first great book, the one called Democracy in America. A few details of the story behind that. When he was 26, he got a commission from the French government to advise the penal system, the prison system in France, and he got a grant to tour the United States, a nation that was then about 50 years old, and to see how they had arranged their prisons and to make a report. And he took advantage of this opportunity to make a much wider inquiry into the life and customs of the United States that produced this book, which is still widely read by Americans as we try to understand ourselves, and read by theorists of democracy and modern liberalism. And I'd like to talk about some basic ideas about politics, which might set the tone for our study of Tocqueville. The kind of complex idea, I think, that pushes, that animates, that helps make sense of Tocqueville's cautious embrace of democracy is his very careful saying yes to democracy without loving everything about it. So I'll put it this way: there are basic choices in politics that. There are different kinds of republics. You can have the aristocratic republic that was from the past of Tocqueville, the war of France before he was born, where a few noble families had all the power. Or you can have a modern democracy, which generally means, along the lines of the Federalists, that what you have is a democratic republic, not the people actually running things, but electing representatives. And both of these have their virtues, and that's harder for us to understand. What would be the virtue of an unequal, aristocratic, hereditary society? Why would that be good? Well, I can make one case for why it would be good. That a democratic republic, the virtue of that, so when we elect our representatives, when it sorts out the talents. So, at least we hope this happens when there's an election, that we find good people for the powerful jobs, and we give them some accountability. So aristocratic republics don't have that. You're born into your power. Unless there's a revolution, it will not be taken away from you. You may be good at it, you may not be good at it. It seems to be just a matter of luck whether you get a good job. You don't have to work hard, and you're not judged afterwards. So the great advantage of a democracy is that with the republic, it sorts out the talent and puts people in the right places. But its drawback is that it doesn't have a correct range of places because it's tied to its equality, and not everybody is the same. So democracies always measure themselves and enforce some degree of equality, but people are not equal. Not everybody is meant to be prime minister or even the superintendent of schools or whatever government job is available. That democracies tend to make everyone start equal. Of course, they can break down, but then they're ceasing to be democracies. Of course, your family helps you out, so you're not equal with everyone. But democratic families tend not to last as long as aristocratic families for various reasons, and they can't simply put their children directly into places of power. Um, so unless the democracy is falling apart, they enforce a kind of equality, at least in the start. People, of course, have the ability to distinguish themselves. You can make a career for yourself. You don't have to end up where you started. That can be in a well-functioning democracy. That's a possibility. But even the beginning tends to limit people. Everybody's got to hustle. You got to try to make you could try to make some money and try to make your way. You've got to scrounge for connections. You've got to have your mind on everything that you have to do to get ahead of the others, and this limits you in a way that aristocracy can let some people free of this necessity to hustle for change and to be always on the make and to be always thinking of your own career and trying to get ahead, at least till half your life is over, and half is a lot. Aristocratic republics have a different situation. They don't sort the talent. You're born into it. So you may not deserve it. You may not be good at it. You may accept no accountability for it. But that's the character of the aristocratic republic. Everybody is not equal. Some are in a much better position than others. But they do have the correct range of places. That the proper places where some people should be. That they can start early in life. Like Tocqueville himself had enough aristocratic support left over after the revolution to be making an important study when he was 26 and publishing an important book that got everybody's attention when he was 30. The aristocratic republics have the correct range of places because they do not make everybody be at least partly equal. And they can be good places if luck puts the right people in the right places. And that is the basic dilemma that the choices in politics give us. We have in the modern world, in the modern compared to the ancient world, a choice of different republics. And the democracies do better at choosing people for their places. At least they do something, because they're not perfect. But often when they're not doing well, it's because they are failing at being democracies and not because because democracy wouldn't help. But they choose people for their places, but they don't have the right range of places. So they make everybody spend half their life or more just getting the freedom where they can think for themselves and exercise some power. Whereas the aristocratic republics do have the right range of places, but they don't necessarily put the right people in them.